Hi, my name's Dr. Adam Booth and welcome to another locked-down edition of Quantum Source. Now, we don't always release the Quantum Source episodes in the same order that we recorded them in, and maybe your only clue to what that recording order was is in the length of my increasingly unkempt lockdown beard. I haven't shaved it since lockdown began, partly because I couldn't be bothered, but also because it's become a little bit of a lockdown friend. It's almost like the length of it is the equivalent of chalking up the days on the jail cell that you've been incarcerated. But of course I did see a lot of people who were really concerned about how hairdressers were going to be shut, and so they would have to cut their own hair. Obviously it's not something that I have to really contend with, but nonetheless I've made up for it where I can. And that did get me thinking about doing a quantum source on beards. And so a quick internet search led me to Dr. Tamsin Saxton, who is a behavioural scientist in the Department of Psychology at Northumbria University. And she's been doing a lot of work on kind of the evolution of beards, beard psychology, why people grow them, and why people may or may not like them. So in just a second, we're going to be giving Tamsin a call, and maybe I'll find a few uncomfortable home truths about my own psychological outlook or something. You never know where these are going to go. But before we do that, as with all quantum sources, there's a recommendation that fascinating facts are best served with your favourite tipple. And so here I'm channeling my inner hipster. It often seems to me that hipsters' drink of choice is gin, and this is the most hipsterish gin that we had in the house. This is gin that actually contains ants. Yeah. Ants, right? I don't know if you can see them, but if I just hold up the bottom of the bottle, maybe you can see them floating around in there. It apparently gives it kind of like a limey, acidic kick, which may be equivalent to getting stung in the mouth by an Australian ant. You know, suffer for your pleasures and all that. But anyway, you get yourself something refreshing, and we'll give Tamsin a call. Cheers. And hello, Tamsin. How are you? Good afternoon.
Hello, Adam. I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right. It's a little bit of a miserable day, which always takes the edge off, but we're getting there.
Good.
Cool. So, obviously, you're interested in both the beards and the brains. Which of those came first? How did you get into that?
Oh, interesting. So a lot of my research is around attraction and attractiveness. And what sort of physical features make people attracted to each other? Right. So including things like beards, facial features, bodies, movements, voices, even like natural skin odours. Okay. And I'm also interested in how people differ in what they find most attractive. So that's kind of my general research area.
All right, cool. Right, before we get you to give that presentation, though, let's say that you're walking down the street, you fancy a drink, you go into a bar and you're served by a bearded hipster barman. What is it that you've asked him for?
Well, do you know, I do like a ginger beer. Right. And actually, in honour of today's talk, I've added my own little bit of graffiti to my sample ginger beer can. There we go.
Oh, nice. my old lockdown friend feels very touched by that. Okay, cool. Well, let's check out your presentation then.
Okay. So I call the talk today, Why the Beard? And I was planning on talking through why beards exist, why people might grow a beard, why not everybody has a beard. And I think this topic's really fascinating, in part because it demands coverage of biological facts and social facts and historical facts. And you've got to weave all of those together to try and understand a bit more about the beard. But obviously, when it comes to beards and facial hair, then there's a lot of facts you've got to put together and try and explain. And one of those is that people's facial hair can be really quite distinctive. It can be as distinctive as a signature for them. So on the screen there, we've got the surrealist facial hair of Salvador Dali. Yep. We've got Charlie Chaplin's really distinctive moustache. And we've got Charles Darwin and his very big distinctive beard. Now, Adam, quiz question for you.
Right.
Why, until a couple of years ago, would many people in the UK have been regularly handling images of Charles Darwin?
Wasn't it the anniversary? It wasn't his birthday. Like it was a significant one, like 200 years or something like that.
There was, yeah. There's a particular reason though why people have been regularly holding images of Charles Darwin.
Oh, right, yeah. I was going to say I did a premature celebration there, but he was on a banknote because
Nice, yeah,
he was on a
yeah.
10 quid banknote, and they were taking him into the bank to get him replaced.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so he was on the £10 note. Good stuff. He was on the £10 note, and in 2018, when the paper notes were replaced by the polymer ones, then he no longer exists on the notes. But apparently, it said that one of the reasons why his portrait was so suitable for the £10 note was because of his big beard, making him particularly difficult to forge.
Oh, right. I mean, that's exactly the look I'm going for here, right? I don't want people like ripping me up.
Exactly. But facial hair has been a concern of people kind of as long back as we know about, really. So even back in ancient Egyptian times, then facial hair was really something that was considered to be quite important in everyday society. And priests would shave their facial hair because of its associations with lack of cleanliness, but then they would wear fake beards, false beards for ceremonial purposes. And I guess you'll have come across before this image, this famous image of Tutankhamun and his death mask with the strange stylized beard there. In fact, the facial hair beards was such a prevalent feature, such a powerful symbol in Egyptian society, that in the British Museum there is a mummified infant with a little tiny infant fake beard. And when a female wanted to become ruler of the Egyptians, when she wanted to become pharaoh, following the death of her husband, the former pharaoh, she starts being depicted in images as wearing a false beard.
Okay.
So lots of things going on with facial hair. But that leaves open this really big question, which is, if facial hair is so important, if it's such a big deal, then why doesn't everybody get to have facial hair? Why do we see it on men, but not women or children? And when it comes to a why question like this, why the beard, then there's this lovely framework that's been put forward to try and understand biological features. And this framework was put forward by Nico Tinbergen, who was a Nobel Prize winner, and also an ethologist who studied animal behaviour. And he pointed out that if you want to understand animal behaviour, if you want to understand biological features, there's actually 4 different questions you've got to ask, 4 different types of explanation you need to understand to really get that complete understanding. And 2 of the questions are known as proximate level questions, because they kind of look at the individual in front of you, the here and now. And those 2 questions are, first of all, how does this feature develop? When does it come about in an individual's lifetime? And what are the immediate underlying causes? What are the mechanisms leading to this feature? How do hormones provoke it, or cognitive states, or environment, or social factors? What's going on to cause this feature in here and now? There are also 2 questions known as ultimate level or evolutionary questions. And these ask, how and when did this feature arise in evolutionary time? So do you find this feature in related species? When did it come about? And the final evolutionary question, how does it help individuals survive and reproduce? How has it evolved? So we'll look at some of those questions in relation to beards, starting with the question of how they develop. So beards develop actually relatively late on during puberty. Boys start to grow facial hair, and the growing facial hair, maybe the first shave, seems to be a bit of a rite of passage. And the way this facial hair develops is through the action of androgens, so-called male hormones, on hair follicles. And in fact, humans have got hairs all over their body, apart from soles of the feet, palm of the hands and lips. But a lot of these hairs, you can barely see them because they're teeny tiny, they're not pigmented, they're really small, really thin. But as the androgens act on the hair follicles in certain areas of the body, then they can develop, they become longer, thicker, coarser, more pigmented, hence the growth of the beard. Now, because androgens, male hormones, are so important in beard growth, then it's easy to assume that a big beard means high levels of testosterone. People say, surely this man's got a really big beard, he must be really high in testosterone. And in fact, there's no such simple relationship. It's not like somebody with a big beard has lots of testosterone, somebody that doesn't grow a beard has low levels of testosterone. There's a bit of association there, so testosterone can provoke beard growth. There's not that straightforward relationship that you might assume. And in fact, differences in beard growth are better explained more broadly, just with reference to genetic factors, that kind of thing. And I suppose the other complication in trying to understand the link between, sort of underlying biology and facial hair is that there are so many factors that can influence whether somebody has a beard or not. Because of course you can do things to it, you can groom it, shave it, trim it, do what you want. And if you look across history, then you can see how different styles, facial hair styles, have changed over time. So if you look at portraiture across the ages, you can see people having beards or going clean shaven, or moustaches, sideburns, all these different things coming in and out of fashion. Or recently, we can look at how beards change in newspapers or magazines. And even, I guess, across the course of the last few years, we can sort of think back about how beard fashions have changed somewhat. And people have tried to link these changing fashions to specific events where they can. So obviously lots and lots of things going on, but sometimes you can tie beard fashions, facial hair fashions to specific events. And I've got some examples here. So the image on the left is a Russian beard tax token. This was in the 18th century. If a man wanted to maintain his facial hair, he had to pay a tax, and he'd get one of these tokens to denote that he'd paid his tax. This was introduced by Peter the Great, who went on a tour around Western Europe and decided he liked the look of the more clean-shaven fashion in Western Europe.
The benefits of an authoritarian regime.
And then moving into the 19th century, then we have Britain's involvement in the Crimean War from about the mid-19th century. Now, before the Crimean War, beards didn't necessarily have that positive an association. You might have seen them sort of more often on labourers, that kind of thing. When people went off to war, then they were in a place where it was very cold, and it might be very difficult to access shaving materials, and so they tended to grow beards. And of course, you can easily see how coming back from war, you've survived the war, maybe you're a war hero, and you've grown this big beard. So of course, the general perception of beards may well have been changed by that kind of event. Moving forward a century again, another war, this time the First and Second World Wars, where gas masks were in use. And actually gas masks don't really work with facial hair with big beards. So if you want to wear a gas mask safely, then that's kind of going to be you shaving off your beard.
As you can imagine, kind of similar recommendations for like PPE during the lockdown. So, it's like there was this, I think it was fairly tongue-in-cheek, but there was all these kind of like 16 different designs of beards and then a tick or a cross next to them about how much protection it offers you when you're wearing a face mask.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, so people didn't like this idea. You had to shave off your beard to wear a gas mask. And in fact, back in medieval times, they had helmets that were designed to allow you to wear a beard with this helmet. So you think you'd manage something, but apparently not. And as you say, lots of different reasons, even now, why people might have to wear a beard or not have to wear a beard, including things like PPE. Other examples are just general, I guess your employer might often have something to say about whether you can have facial hair or not. Military employers in particular, so facial hair can be associated with particular ranks. In the Navy, apparently, then there's quite strict regulations on beard wearing. If you want to grow a beard, if you're allowed to, if you get permission, then you've got 2 weeks approximately to get a full beard. And if you don't manage it in 2 weeks, then that's it. You're back to being clean shaven. All sorts of rules and regulations. And religious regulations. So Roman Catholic priests expected to be clean shaven. Greek Orthodox priests expected to have a beard. And of course, Sikh religions have stipulations around facial hair. So it's easy to see about how all these different influences and factors changing over time could shape the different fashions coming in and out of facial hair. But none of this tells us about the ability to grow facial hair in the first place and how that might have come about. So for that, we can start thinking about processes of evolution. And evolutionary processes are often categorised in terms of natural selection and sexual selection. So natural selection focuses on the traits, the features that help individuals survive, whereas sexual selection focuses on the traits that give individuals better reproductive opportunities. And one big force within sexual selection is that of being able to attract mates. So sexual selection is particularly interesting because it can give rise to differences between males and females. And one of the classic examples is the peacock's tail. So the peacock got this really stunning tail, the peahen doesn't. And this peacock's tail is probably quite a hindrance, really, in terms of straightforward survival. You're not going to be able to get away quickly from a predator with this big thing swinging after you.
Yeah, trying to run between two trees in the forest. Not going to happen.
Exactly. Yes. But turns out peahen really likes it. And so you get this difference between males and females because of the preferences of the females in this case. And the question of what's attractive has been enormously studied in humans as well. Lots of psychological research on what people find attractive. And that's focused on all kinds of different things. So body shapes of shoulders and hips and waists, things about people's facial features, what sort of things can we change to make people be perceived as more or less attractive, how all these things are tied together. And typically in this kind of research, you would get people into a lab and you'll show them stimuli and you'll just say to them, what do you find attractive? What do you prefer? So when it comes to beard research, then the sorts of stimuli that have been used are like the ones on the slide here. So different, there have been, a decent handful of studies have looked at how facial hair might influence attractiveness. And you get stimuli that you use, such as videos of people that you persuaded to grow a beard or shave it off, photographs, line drawings, just verbal descriptions. But they're basically all trying to do the same sort of thing, to work out how facial hair shapes perceptions of attractiveness. So Adam, what do you think? What do you think the kind of findings might be? Do you look at these images and think, yes, this person looks more attractive at this point or this point? Like, how do you think people are perceiving these types of images?
I guess that's looking at some of the faces that are in that sort of shaded panel. I can't quite tell, but it looks that some of them are not the same face with or without beards, and I suppose I'm looking more at the face overall, whether they seem to be smiling or something like that, rather than I am just looking at the beard in itself. But I guess that the study just suggests that people like what they like and there isn't any trend.
It is that, yeah. So of these studies that have looked at the attractiveness of beards, then some of them report that people like clean. I say people, it tends to be heterosexual women judging these faces. People tend to report, some studies report that people like clean-shaven faces, some say bearded faces. Some people report that it's somewhere in between. But there's not a really strong source of evidence saying, yes, beards make men more attractive, and therefore that there's no evidence that it's this process of attraction, the sexual selection process of enhancing attraction. Having said that, of course, there are people that like facial hair, lots of individual differences. And I'm going to take a slight detour just to talk about one group of people for whom facial hair might be a little bit more appealing than average. So to introduce that, I'm going to show you 5 images on the screen. On the left-hand side, there's a man with a red rectangle around him. And then you've got 4 men on the right-hand side. Which one of the 4 does the man on the left look most like?
I would say number 3.
Good. I'm glad you said that.
Okay.
that's what not everybody, most people tend to go for. Now,
Right.
These sets of studies, these sets of images, are from a study where women were asked to supply photographs of their fathers and their husbands.
Okay.
And so the researchers laid them out like this. You've got the father on the left-hand side, and you've got the same woman's husband and 3 other women's husbands jumbled up. Yeah. And then the researchers asked people the same question I asked you, so which one looks most similar? And what you find is that on average, just at rates exceeding chance, people's husbands are being matched the appearance of their fathers.
Okay.
And that sort of finding has been replicated in different domains. So it's been looked at in terms of hair colour, eye colour, general facial appearance, a whole range of different things. And you tend to get, just as a subtle effect, it does seem to be coming out fairly regularly. But there's some people attracted to things that are familiar, perhaps particularly familiar in a family context. There's some evidence that this familiarity is most linked to the gender of the. So the people you're attracted to, the ones that look a little bit like the parent whose gender matches them. So you're attracted to men, then you're going for people that look like your father. You're attracted to women, you're going for people that look a bit like your mother.
Right.
Soft effect, not true of everybody, but it seems to be there.
I'm just going to give a shout out to Alan, my future father-in-law. So I'll be doing a little comparison of us later, Alan. Just
glad to hear it. And this has been looked at in one study that I'm aware of in terms of beardedness, and the researchers measured women's preferences for facial hair, so women's and men's preferences for facial hair, and asked them about they asked the people about their father's facial hair, and they asked the men about their own facial hair. And they found that when it came to homosexual men, then homosexual men tended to like the facial hair in others that matched their own facial hair. And for heterosexual women, they tended to like the facial hair in others that matched their father's facial hair. Okay. So again, that sort of familiarity. Yeah. So having said that, beardedness isn't necessarily attractive, then there are some ways in which you might predict that it's more attractive to some people than others.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah, one of the things I was going to tell you about. So, not just beardedness, but also body hair. So I thought I'd mention this study because it's got a nice little methodology. The researchers got 20 men to come into the lab and to shave off their body hair. And they actually rewarded them with a bottle of vodka.
Was that to drink before they waxed them?
I like to think it was after they did the hair. You never know. And then they went out into the field and asked women about their father's body hair and their preferences for these men's body hair. And same sort of pattern. Women who had hairier fathers tended to have stronger preferences for the men's body hair. So okay. So moving back to this question of sexual selection, we don't, it seems, have good evidence that attraction has been driving facial hair growth. But there's another side to sexual selection, which is about mate competition. So lots of examples in other species where males have traits, have physical characters that seem to exist to enable them to compete with other males for access to females, reproductive access. So again, a classic example is the stag's antlers, and they'll go around fighting other stags during rutting season. Now, when it comes to psychology studies, there's probably been less research on competition, male-male competition, than on attraction. But there's been a bit of research done, and typically you will ask people about perceived dominance. The idea is that if somebody looks dominant, then you might infer that they're going to be a strong competitor. So if we go back to the images that I showed you previously, where people have been asked to rate these images for attractiveness, then often in the same studies, the people are asked to rate images for how dominant they appear to be. And what are your perceptions, Adam? Would you say some of these faces look more dominant than others?
Yeah, I would say that the faces in the lower row look more dominant, and that's probably because they just look a bit sterner in their facial expression.
That's funny. You've got pairs of faces, so you've got four pairs of faces, and it's the same man each time, one with a beard and one without a beard. I don't know, it might be too resolution to quite make it out. Does the facial hair itself do anything in terms of your perceptions of dominance?
Yeah, I guess it does. I think it definitely helps the lower two guys look more dominant, I think.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Huh. So you think that when they're looking a bit more stern, then the facial hair makes more dominant. When they're smiling, it doesn't have such an impact.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah. So I think maybe I'm judging it mostly by the sternness rather than by the facial hair.
Okay, that's interesting. Right. Huh. Well, so I guess there's both those things going on, aren't they? Both facial hair itself and expression might have an impact. But certainly in the studies that have looked at this, then you tend to get quite a consistent finding that people perceive those with facial hair to be more dominant, and to be other similar related characteristics. They're perceived to be more masculine, stronger, more aggressive. Not just horrible things. Also. Pro-social characteristics related to social status. So people with facial hair are more likely to be judged to be maybe more generous, more extroverted, to have higher social status itself, that kind of thing.
It seems to be just more everything. It just amplifies things or something.
Well, I guess you could turn everything on its head, couldn't you? You can say that people without facial hair look less aggressive or more friendly.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. It goes both ways. But this sort of research is kind of, it seems better evidence that there is some sort of sexual selection involved, but it's maybe not to do with attracting people. It's maybe more to do with the competition, the male-male competition side of things, which is kind of the evolution explanation given the facial hair. So that's about what I wanted to talk about today. I hope it's been interesting, and I also hope that next time somebody asks you, why do you have a beard, you can tell them it's because there is no beard tax. It's because of the action of androgens on your facial hair follicles, and it's also because of the evolutionary pressures on your ancestors.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Tamsin. Let's get you to unshare the screen. Well, thank you very much for that. It's given me some insights into my own beard, although I know that regardless of how I currently feel about my beard, I'm stingy enough that if there was a beard tax, it would be coming straight off. I'm a real northerner in that regard. And also, my beard says nothing about my generosity, I'll tell you that now. So there was a question then. So when you were talking about the soldiers in the Crimean War, this is something I can partly empathise with because a lot of my own research is to go off into the Arctic, and we do quite long field campaigns where it's quite cold, and not only do you not have the capacity to shave, actually having a beard can take some of the wind chill off. So when you talk about evolutionary terms, I'm thinking of like survival of the fittest rather than a kind of like sexual selection process. Is there that kind of evolutionary drive between beard development as well?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I'm not aware of any studies directly on the thermal properties of beards, but
Right.
as you say, I mean, clearly hair is an insulator, isn't it? So you might think it would help. And I guess one of the reasons why people have looked to sexual selection explanations of facial hairs is in part because there's no obvious relationship between environmental variables and the prevalence of facial hair. It's not like you see that the types of populations that have lived for generations in hot countries don't have facial hair, and the populations that have lived for generations in cold countries do have facial hair. So there's not that obvious explanation. And I guess the other side of things is, if it's critical to warmth and wind protection, then why don't the women and children have one as well? So there's got a little bit more going on. But that's a really interesting question. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing is, when people start to get kind of creative with their beards and they sort of like sculpting it or plaiting it or just doing something more than what I've got going on, which is just a general is there research into that then? Because I imagine that it really sort of splits the field again, but there's obviously a lot of time taken over grooming your beard in that way. And does that suggest anything? Say, like, you mentioned earlier this kind of like hygiene thing with beards as well. Maybe if you're taking time to groom your beard, you're showing you are actually being consciously hygienic. Is there studies on that?
That's really interesting. Again, I'm not aware of those sorts of studies, but I mean, humans can do all sorts of creative things, can't they, to signal things that give them information about themselves. So, like you say, beards can have cultural significance, can't they? They can be conveying something about the wearer, about the bearer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool. All right. It's been really interesting. Thanks very much. And like I say, I need to go and just take some looks at my my future father-in-law. So, you never know what you learn on Quantum Source. Speaking of that, I would say that anyone out there who's got any questions, then I think Tamsin does have a very rarely checked Twitter account. But if you've got any questions, then do post them on the Quantum Source Twitter feed, and then I can convey them to Tamsin, and I'm sure she'd be happy to take any questions that you've got.
I would, yeah. And it's been really nice chatting. Thank you so much, Adam.
Yeah, no problem at all. And with that, we'll say bye, and I'll leave it to your afternoon.
Thank you.
Cool.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take it easy then. Bye-bye.
So thanks very much to Tamsin, and what do you think? Should I or shouldn't I? If you believe that talk, then 50% of you will say yes, 50% of you will say no, and there's no point in me asking any of you at all. But if you do have any particularly strong opinions about my beard and whether it simply makes me look like a crazed shipwrecked mariner, then you can let us know at the Quantum Source Twitter and Instagram feeds, where we'll also be posting notifications of further podcasts to keep you educated and entertained during lockdown times. Just remains for me to say that this has been Quantum Source. I've been Dr. Adam Booth. You've been great. Cheers now.